they heard. And so you think you're being clear and you're actually being cloudy because you haven't practiced your communication. If you think about professionals, 50,000 a year, if we're a middle manager at Lockheed Martin or Boeing or John Deere or one of those big Fortune 100 companies. Cool. So when we get up a little bit higher and we begin to work at this level, above this line is where wealth begins to be created. And so this level is communication. And on the communication level, the resource you use to create wealth is your mouth. So use your mouth to create wealth. And on this level, on the low end, you could be making $100,000 a year selling cars. On the high end, you could be making $100 million. And so when we understand the levels of value, in order for me to make more money, I have to work at a higher level of spiritual activity. Managing people who do the work is a higher level of spiritual activity than doing the work yourself. Communicating a message that creates a message that moves the masses, or having conversations that create cash flow, is a higher spiritual activity than just managing the people doing the thing. You think about it. Language is something that only spiritual beings have. So if you want to create a higher level of wealth, you must become a better communicator. There are several ways you can become a better communicator. One is read more books. Two is to actually write more. If you will read more and you will write more, it'll help you become, like, when you write something down and you think you're clear, if you want to find out if you're as clear as you think you are, take the thing you think you're clear about and write it down, and then go read it to someone. And if they get it, then you're clear. If they don't get it, then you're not nearly as clear as you thought you were. Okay. And then the highest level of value is imagination. And on this level, you use two resources. You use your mind and you use your money to create wealth. And on this level, you could be making anywhere on the low end from $1 million a year to, on the high end, it could be billions. Okay. So when we understand that thinking is a higher spiritual activity than talking is higher than managing people, and managing people is higher than doing it yourself. So when you operate at a higher spiritual level, operating at a higher spiritual level produces more wealth, because that's the way God set it up from the beginning. Okay, I'm not going to change that. You're not going to change that. So understand that because wealth is spiritual, your level of wealth will be determined by the spiritual level that you are working on when you create the wealth. So if look at your time that you spend working. If the time you spend working, if most of that time you're spent working, you spend actually manipulating something physically, the amount of money you're going to be able to make doing that is going to be limited. Why? Because muscles are a physical resource. Time is a limited resource. When I take a physical resource and I multiply it times a limited resource, I have to get a limited output. Like, the output can't be unlimited. So, but if you think about it, if I'm managing people, I'm actually getting more work done than if I did the thing myself. This is why when you build a business, when you hire people, hiring people helps you get more productivity done. Why? Because managing people is a higher spiritual activity than doing the thing yourself. And there are ways in which managing people is harder than doing the thing yourself, but it's also worth it. Okay, so you're tracking. So that's principle number one under the first pillar. Create a mental wealth inventory. So the first principle in the mental wealth inventory is this: your wealth level will be determined by the level of spirituality that you're working on when you create it. B, the next point or the next principle is this: your wealth is determined by your ability to create value for someone other than yourself. So you have to go out into the marketplace. You have to find a big pool of people with a really big problem, or at least a problem that they're willing to pay to solve. The bigger the pool of people and the bigger the problem, and the deeper the pockets are of the people who have that problem, the more likely I am to get wealthy in that arena. So many people, they don't evaluate the pool of people. Is the pool of people big enough? They don't ask that question. Like, you start a business, you don't even ask, are there like 100 people in the world that want this? Or there are 100,000? Or there are 100 million? Or are there billions of people who would desire to have this outcome if they knew it existed? Because if the pool of people is too small, it doesn't matter how good your solution is. See, some people go out and they'll write a book and they'll think, this is a great book. What may be a great book, but if nobody wants to read it, it doesn't matter. They'll go invent something and say, this is the greatest product ever invented. It might be, but if nobody wants the result the product can produce, it doesn't matter. And so, is there a big pool of people? You have to ask that question. You're getting ready to go into business. Is there a big pool of people that have this problem? Okay. Is the problem a big problem, or is it a mosquito bite Or is it like a snake bite? Like, how severe is the result of not solving this problem? How devastating are the consequences of not solving this problem? Because the bigger the pool of people is, and the bigger the problem is, then like I have just increased greatly my opportunity to create wealth. And see, a lot of you, what you've done is you've gone to school for a thing, and you study that thing, and you got all this time, effort, energy, and money invested in learning how to do this thing. So to you, you value the thing you put money into, time into, effort into, energy into. And so what you've done is you go out into the marketplace, you want to talk to people about that. I've got news for you. They don't care. They care about their stuff, their problems. You're talking, and you want to interrupt what they're already thinking about, what they're already concerned about, and then you want to get them concerned about something else because that's what you know how to do. I promise you, that is called the formula for disaster. So, wealth, your ability to create wealth. This is principle number 2 under your wealth, your spiritual wealth inventory. So understand, or your mental wealth inventory. This is number 1 under your mental wealth inventory. You have to, number 2 rather, you have to you have to have the ability to create value for someone other than yourself. And so that means we have to stop making ourselves the priority, and we have to make other people the priority, and stop worrying about our problems. I need to make this money. 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 And then go out and solve somebody else's problem. And then they'll be, I'm happy to pay this money. I'm happy to pay this money. I'm happy to pay this money. And so your wealth is going to be in direct proportion to your ability to create wealth, to create value for someone other than yourself. But if you're going to create value for someone other than yourself, you have to understand how to perceive value, what other people value. So in order to perceive what other people value, you have to know where values come from. Like, where do people get their values? What causes you to value one thing and you to value something else and you to value something else and you to value something else and me to value yet something else? What causes that? Well, I believe that there are 3 primary, there are more than this, but there are 3 primary places values come from. Number 1, past perceived voids create present pursued values. What does that mean? Things that you feel like were missing in the past are things that you value in the present, so therefore you are pursuing them. Why? Because you didn't have it in the past, but you desired it in the past. So it was lacking, but it was loved. And so now you didn't, even though you've never had it, you still desire it. The thing that made me want to be rich more than any other thing was being poor. Right? I'm just keeping it real. I hated being poor. I hated life telling me no, it cost too much every time I desired to do something. So I said, okay, past perceived voids create present pursued values. Another one, present perceived virtues create present perceived values, pursued values. What does that mean? That means things that I perceive as good right now, those are the things that I'll put my effort and energy and time into pursuing. Why? Because present perceived virtues, things that I currently perceive are good, those are the things I value. So if you're talking to me about how to have more of the things that I presently perceive as virtuous or as good, then my answer is going to be an automatic yes. Are y'all tracking? Okay. So number 3, values. So first, values come from past perceived voids, create present pursued values. Present perceived virtues create present pursued values. And then future perceived visions create present pursued values. So if I have a vision for an outcome in the future, and the more clearly I can see that outcome happening for me, the more likely I am to say yes to an offer that tells me that I can have that thing in the future. So if I can learn how to communicate to people in a way that lets them know I can help them fulfill their past perceived voids, their present perceived virtues, and their future perceived visions, they are much more likely to say yes to me and my offer. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So next is, pillar number 1, create a mental wealth inventory. Pillar number 2, create a verbal wealth inventory. A verbal wealth inventory. The quality of your life is going to be in direct proportion with the quality of your communication. What does that mean? Well, King Solomon said it like this: death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. He said it like this: a man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth. Job said it like this: thou shalt also declare a thing, and it shall be established unto thee. So our mouths, every word that comes out of our mouths, are a seed that we are sowing into the garden of our future. So if I desire to reap a good harvest in the future, because today is yesterday's tomorrow, if I desire to reap a good harvest in the future, then I better be about the business of sowing good seeds with my words today. So, a verbal wealth inventory. You must learn how to convey or communicate the value that you've created clearly. You have to learn how to communicate it clearly. Okay, so I'm going to say something to you. I'm going to quote my daughter first. Here's what she always says: the biggest mistake in communication is thinking that it happened. Wow, what? Okay. Now I'm going to give you an original Myron Golden quote. You didn't say what you thought you said. You said what they thought they heard. Oh, snap. You didn't say what you thought you said. You said what they thought they heard. And so you think you're being clear, and you're actually being cloudy because you haven't practiced your communication. If you think about professionals and amateurs in any arena, it doesn't matter if it's golf or basketball or tennis or brain surgery or chess or sword fighting, it doesn't matter. Martial art, it doesn't matter. You think about any professional, the difference between a professional and an amateur in any arena is professionals spend most of their time preparing and only a small fraction of their time performing. Amateurs spend a large majority of their time performing and a very, very small amount of time preparing. If you will learn to prepare 4 to 10 times as much time, if you'll learn to put 4 to 10 times as much time into preparation as you do to performance, you can move from being an amateur to the arena of being a professional. And guess what happens when you move into the arena of being a professional? You get paid like a professional. But if you're unwilling to prepare your words, like I'm amazed how most people don't think, they just think they think. And most people who think they're being clear are being as cloudy as a London afternoon. Okay. Or morning, if it's more cloudy in the morning in London. It's been cloudy all day there for me when I was there. Anyway, I'm gonna let somebody else have that. So you have to get clear. And how can I get more? How can I become more clear? Read more, write more. Think like a genius, talk like a third grader. What does that mean? That means have really, really great ideas, but take those really, really great ideas and figure out a way that you could communicate it to a third grader in a way that they would say, oh, I get it. If you can't communicate on a third grade level, communicate on a 5th grade level. If you can't communicate on a 5th grade level, then just go stop working on creating messaging, because you're wasting your breath. One of the reasons you're not clear is because you are attempting to impress people with how smart you are. And I promise you, if they're impressed, they won't be impacted. But if they're impacted, they will be impressed. So instead of attempting to impress people, why don't you just go ahead and impact people with the clarity of your words? Okay. So your wealth will be determined by the level of, you must communicate with the value you've created. You must communicate it clearly, but you must also communicate the value you've created concisely. People have a lot to do. They don't want to sit there and listen to you ramble, and they definitely don't want to sit there and watch you figure out what you're going to say while you're talking to them. If there's something that's painful for me, it's watching you figure it out as you go along while you're attempting to prove to me that you are an expert. Just put me out of your misery now, please. Right? So you must communicate it clearly. You must communicate it concisely. You have to learn how to get to the point. You spend all of this time making a case. It's interesting as I'm coaching people. I'll say, okay, when you ask a question, start with my question is, and then ask the question. And they'll say, my question is, well, what had happened was I started a business back in 2017. It wasn't the business I wanted to start, but it was the business I had to start because, and like, time out. That's not a question. Do you understand if you can't even get to the point when you're talking to a coach or an advisor or a spouse or one of your children, if you can't even get to the point, then like, how could you possibly think that you're going to go out and talk to somebody who doesn't know you and communicate a message that's going to be clear? Like, you have to be clear, you have to be concise, get to the point. If you don't know what to say, I was talking to a person who used to be one of my clients and she was an attorney. She said one of the best things that ever happened to me when I was in law school is they made us write out everything. And she said, I learned when I wrote out everything, it helped me become more clear. There's a book that's really, really good at helping people think more clearly. It's called Accidental Genius by Mark Levy. And you can find it in my Amazon storefront, MyronGoldenAMZ.com. But it's called Accidental Genius. And what it does, he teaches this concept called free writing. And he says, just sit down with a pen and a paper and write whatever comes to your mind. Don't think about it. Don't edit it. Don't fix it. Just write. Write. And write for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. He says, you will be blown away by how this practice will cause you to become more fluid in your communication and in your thinking. Okay. So you must communicate the value you've created clearly. You must communicate the value you've created concisely, and you must communicate the value you've created compellingly. The value you've created can only be conveyed compellingly if you're talking to them about stuff they care about and showing them that the value you've created is the vehicle or the bridge to get them there. If you talk about what you've created, the value you've created, if you talk about it like it is the destination, like it is the objective, like it is the outcome, what's going to happen is they're going to say something like, let me think about it. Let me talk it over with my wife, my husband, my next door neighbor, who's just as broke as I am, the dog catcher, the milkman, the mailman, or the UPS driver. They're going to come up with some kind of excuse because they don't have enough intestinal fortitude to tell you no. And they believe that if they tell you they've got to think about it, either you won't check back with them, because most people who consider themselves in sales don't check back with them, or when they do check back, they just ignore you, right? So that's their way of telling you no without telling you no, okay? So instead of doing that, sit down and think about them from their perspective. So when you're talking to them, you're only talking to them about stuff they care about instead of talking to them about stuff you want them to care about. See, one of the reasons that I believe that my messaging is so compelling